안녕하세요, 여러분. 오늘은 Power of Love, 사랑의 힘이라는 제목의 영어 동화를 통해 중급 수준 리스닝 실력 향상, 핵심 어휘 자연스럽게 익히기를 함께 연습해 보겠습니다. 이 수업에서는 귀로는 영어 원문을 듣고 눈으로는 중요한 단어의 한글 뜻을 함께 보며 학습하는 방식으로 진행됩니다. 즉, 듣기 플러스 어휘 학습을 동시에 할 수 있도록 구성되어 있어요. 이야기 간단 소개. 이 이야기는 운명, 인내, 그리고 사랑의 힘을 다룬 판타지 동화입니다. 왕의 세 딸 중 막내 공주는 예언의 책 때문에 낮에는 돼지로 살아야 하는 저주에 걸린 왕자와 결혼하게 됩니다. 처음에는 두렵고 절망적이었지만 공주는 점점 그의 진짜 모습을 알게 되고 깊은 사랑에 빠지게 되죠. 그러나 사악한 마녀의 속임수로 저주가 완전히 풀리기 직전 공주는 실수를 하게 되고 왕자는 먼 곳으로 사라집니다. 공주는 철 신발을 신고 세상을 떠돌며 남편을 찾는 험난한 여정을 시작합니다. 마침내 태양, 달, 바람의 어머니에게 도움을 받아 마녀의 성에 도착하고 세 번의 거래 끝에 진정한 사랑으로 저주를 깨트리게 됩니다. 이 이야기는 끝까지 포기하지 않는 사랑이 운명조차 바꿀 수 있다는 메시지를 전합니다. 학습 포인트. 이 이야기에서는 curse, 저주, destiny, 운명, devotion, 헌신, temptation, 유혹, despair, 절망, forgiveness, 용서 같은 중급 필수 감정 및 스토리 어휘들을 자연스럽게 익힐 수 있습니다. 이제부터 영어 원문을 들으면서 화면에 나오는 중요 단어의 한글 뜻을 함께 확인해 주세요. 집중해서 듣고 의미를 상상하면서 따라가 보세요.
Once upon a time, in a distant kingdom, there lived a brave and noble king. One day, the king had to leave the palace to fight a war with a neighboring country. Before he departed, he called his 3 daughters to the throne room. Reaching for a heavy bunch of keys at his belt, he spoke solemnly, "My beloved daughters, while I am away, you may enter any room in the palace you wish, but there is one room at the very end of the hall that must never be opened. If you disobey this command, great misfortune will come upon you." The princesses nodded obediently, and the king left for the battlefield. For the first few months, the princesses kept their promise, but over time, a poisonous curiosity began to grow in the heart of the youngest princess. "Sisters," she whispered, "why is that room forbidden? Could it be that an incredible treasure is hidden inside, one our father has kept from us?" Eventually, the 3 princesses could not resist temptation. They opened the door to the forbidden room. Inside, there were no jewels, no gold coins, nothing of material value. At the center of the room, on a pedestal, lay a single massive book, the Golden Book, open as if waiting for them. The princesses approached the book as if spellbound. The eldest princess, with trembling hands, turned the page and the letters shimmered and whispered, "The eldest princess shall marry the prince of the Eastern Kingdom and become queen." A delighted smile spread across her face. The second princess turned the next page. "The second princess shall marry the prince of the Western Kingdom and enjoy great prosperity." She exhaled a sigh of relief. Finally, it was the youngest princess's turn. Her heart pounding, she turned the page, but the words she read drained all the color from her face. "The youngest princess shall marry the pig that comes from the north." The princesses screamed and ran from the room, but the prophecy had already been written. Some time later, the king returned victorious from the war. Seeing the pale, anxious faces of his daughters, he immediately guessed what had happened. Though he scolded them, he reassured himself in secret. "Surely no one would really send my daughter to marry a beast." But fate is precise. A few days later, a cloud of dust rose from the northern road outside the palace gates. A bizarre sight appeared. A filthy, enormous pig pulling a silk-lined cart marched straight into the palace courtyard. The pig stood proudly before the king and spoke in a human voice. "Your Majesty, as the Golden Book foretold, I have come for your youngest daughter. She must now become my wife." The king, furious, ordered his soldiers to drive the pig away. But when the pig uttered a magical incantation, the entire palace was engulfed in a thick mist. The soldiers lost all strength to fight. Each day the pig returned, repeating the same demand. Flowers in the palace gardens withered, and the people trembled with fear. At last, the youngest princess knelt before her father, tears streaming down her face. "Father, I cannot allow the kingdom to suffer because of me. If this is my destiny, I will go." With a heart full of grief, the king bid his daughter farewell. The princess, dressed not in a lavish gown, but in simple clothing, climbed into the cart pulled by the pig. The pig sniffed the air with satisfaction and set off toward the deep northern forest. Thus began what seemed to be the tragic chapter of the princess's married life. But that very night, when she arrived at the pig's hut and lit a lamp, the princess witnessed a sight so astonishing that she could hardly believe her eyes. Part 2. The Secret of the Night and the Witch's Temptation. The hut deep in the northern forest was small and humble. The princess entered, trembling with fear, and sought in the darkness as the pig disappeared behind the door. However, as the clock struck midnight, she heard footsteps, not the clicking of hooves, but the firm, elegant stride of a man. When she lit a candle, the princess stood frozen in shock. Standing before her was not a filthy pig, but a prince of dazzling beauty. At his feet lay the coarse pigskin he had just shed. "Do not be afraid, my dear princess," he whispered softly. "I have been cursed to live as a pig by day, but when the moon rises, I regain my human form. If you stay by my side with patience, this spell will one day be broken." As the days passed, the princess grew accustomed to this double life. She fell deeply in love with the prince of the night, and soon they were blessed with a beautiful baby. But a seed of anxiety began to take root in her heart. What if he never becomes human for good? One day, while visiting her family, the princess sought advice from an old woman rumored to be wise. But that old woman was actually a wicked witch in disguise. She leaned in and whispered maliciously, "Princess, there is a way. When the prince falls asleep tonight, tie a strand of blue thread around his left foot. If you do, he will not be able to turn back into a pig when the sun rises, and he will remain a man forever." The princess believed this was the only way to save her husband. That night, while the prince was fast asleep, she pulled out a blue thread with trembling hands. But the moment she tied the knot, something terrible happened. A brilliant blue flash illuminated the room, and the prince woke up with a cry of agony. The thread began to burn with a magical fire, and the prince's face twisted with sorrow and despair. "Oh, princess, what have you done?" he cried out. "There were only 3 days left until my curse was broken. Your impatience has ruined everything." An invisible force began to lift the prince into the air. The princess wept and tried to hold on to his legs, but a massive power tore them apart. As he drifted away, he left her with one final message. "Now I must return to be the witch's slave in a place far, far away. If you wish to find me, you must forge 3 pairs of iron shoes. Only when those shoes have worn away to nothing will you ever see me again." With a blinding flash, the prince vanished, leaving behind nothing but the cries of the baby and the princess's inconsolable sobs. At dawn, she rushed to the forge to order the 3 most durable pairs of iron shoes in the world. Part 3. The Journey in the Iron Shoes. The princess pressed her baby against her chest and put on the first pair of iron shoes, heavy and cold, freshly forged by the blacksmith. With a heart full of repentance and love, she set out on a journey that seemed to have no end, trekking through desolate wilds. The first pair, meeting the mother of the sun. She walked and walked, despite the stabbing pain in her blistered feet. Finally, when the first pair of iron shoes had worn down to mere tatters, she reached the house of the sun at the very edge of the world. The mother of the sun, taking pity on the princess and her baby, gave them food and shelter. At dusk, when the sun returned in his chariot of fire, the princess asked him where her husband might be. However, not even the sun, who illuminates everything, knew the prince's whereabouts. Upon her departure, the mother of the sun gave her a golden apple that glowed with its own light, saying, "This will be of help to you on your path one day." The second pair, meeting the mother of the moon. With the second pair of iron shoes, the princess resumed her march. She dodged the heat of the day and hurried her pace through the nights. When this pair also fell apart from where, she reached the house of the moon. The mother of the moon, with her silver hair, was moved by the princess's devotion, but the moon, who observes the world every night, also did not know the prince's hiding place. She handed the princess a golden spindle that emitted a faint light and encouraged her to press on. The princess continued, leaving her useless shoes behind. The third pair, the mother of the wind and the mountain of glass. By the time she put on the third pair, her feet were already bloodied, but she did not stop. When this final pair was riddled with holes and completely worn out, she reached the house of the wind, who knows all the sounds of the world. When the wind blew back home with great force, his mother asked him about the prince. The wind, who scours every corner of the earth, finally gave the answer. "Your husband is a prisoner in a witch's castle at the summit of the unreachable mountain of glass. There, the witch is trying to force him to marry her daughter." The mother of the wind gave her the final treasure, a golden hen with golden chicks, and asked the wind to carry her on his back to the foot of the mountain. Arrival at the foot of the mountain. The princess stood before a vertical wall of glass. It was so slippery that it seemed impossible to climb, but she did not give up. With agonizing pain, she clawed her way up the precipice until her fingernails bled. Only the hope of asking her husband for forgiveness kept her going. Finally, at the summit, standing before the castle gates, the princess firmly held the three treasures given to her by the sun, the moon, and the wind. Part 4. The Bargains with the Witch and the Reunion. The princess finally reached the summit of the glass mountain, standing before the cold, massive gates of the witch's castle. However, inside the castle, the witch's daughter, who had already laid claim to the prince, stood in her way. The prince himself was under a spell, unable to recognize the princess. All she had left were the three treasures she had gathered on her long journey. The first bargain, the golden apple. Standing before the castle gates, the princess held up the golden apple given to her by the mother of the sun. Coveting its dazzling brilliance, the witch's daughter approached and demanded to buy it. The princess replied firmly, "This apple is not for sale for any amount of money. I will only give it to you on the condition that you let me spend one night in the prince's chamber." The witch's daughter agreed. However, before the princess could enter the room, the witch forced the prince to drink wine laced with a powerful sedative. All night long, the princess stayed by the sleeping prince's side, showing him their baby and crying out, "I have worn out 3 pairs of iron shoes searching for you." But the prince remained motionless, lost in a deep sleep. The second bargain, the golden spindle. The next day, the princess brought out the golden spindle given to her by the mother of the moon. Seeing the mysterious spindle that unwound itself to weave beautiful silk, the witch's daughter proposed another trade. Once again, the princess demanded a night with the prince. But once more, through the witch's cunning, the prince was cast into a deep slumber. The princess's sorrowful voice could not reach the prince's ears and vanished into the empty air. The third bargain, the golden hen and chicks. On the final day, the princess brought out the golden hen and her chicks given to her by the mother of the wind. When the witch's daughter saw the golden hen, which was alive and pecking at jewel-like feed, she wanted it so desperately she nearly lost her mind. The princess entered the prince's room, staking everything on this last chance. However, this time things were different. A loyal servant who had been guarding the prince's door for the past 2 nights had heard the princess's weeping and whispered a tip to the prince in secret. "Your Highness, every night a woman comes in and calls for you, weeping with a heart-wrenching voice. Tonight, please only pretend to drink the wine the witch gives you." The reunion and the breaking of the curse. The prince secretly threw away the wine and pretended to sleep. When the princess entered the room and set the baby down, she took the prince's hand and confessed her years of pain and her enduring love. In that moment, the prince snapped his eyes open and pulled her into an embrace. "Oh, my wife, my love, you have finally found me." The moment the prince truly recognized the princess and their love was reaffirmed, the dark magic surrounding the entire castle began to heave and tremble. The prince declared to the witch and her daughter, "I have found my old key, the princess, so I no longer have any need for the new one, the witch's daughter." With that declaration, the milky glass mountain crumbled with a thunderous roar, and the wicked witch and her daughter were buried beneath the ruins. Part 5. The Final Trial and Eternal Happiness. The Collapse of Evil and the Triumph of Love. As the declaration of the prince echoed through the halls, the witch's power began to shatter. She tried to cast one final, desperate spell to bind them to the mountain, but she was too late. The prince and princess stood hand in hand, their bond now forged stronger than any dark magic. The glass mountain, once an insurmountable barrier, groaned and split apart. The wicked witch and her daughter were swallowed by the very earth they had tried to rule, and their dark reign came to a sudden, thunderous end. The royal homecoming. The prince, the princess, and their child descended from the ruins of the mountain. What had once been a treacherous climb was now a path of radiant crystal that sparkled under the morning sun. When they reached the gates of the princess's home, the elderly king ran out to meet them, his eyes filling with tears of joy. He looked at his daughter, no longer the sheltered girl who had left his palace, but a woman with rough hands and feet that had worn through 3 pairs of iron shoes out of pure devotion. Seeing the noble prince by her side, the king finally understood. The pig from the prophecy was in truth a man of incomparable worth and character. Beyond the prophecy. A grand royal banquet was held, lasting for many days and nights. The prince never had to wear the pigskin again. The hide the princess had burned was now nothing but ash, replaced forever by his shimmering golden armor. The couple ruled the kingdom with wisdom and grace. The princess kept the golden book in her private study, but its pages no longer dictated a cruel fate. Instead, she wrote their own story in the empty margins, teaching her children that destiny is not a cage you are trapped in, but a path you forge with your own footsteps and the strength of your heart. They lived happily ever after, and their story was carried by the wind to every corner of the world, reminding all who heard it that even the darkest curse cannot withstand the power of a love that refuses to give up.